Hey, this is Shane Long, wedding and portrait photographer based in Minnesota and Southwest Florida, and today I am looking at the Samyang 85mm 1.4. I'm comparing it to my RF 85mm f1.2. I want to see if this is a lens I want to put in my bag. So I'm going to look at the bokeh, the sharpness, and the size. All right, here we go. So I've been using the RF 85mm 1.2 for the last couple of years, and this lens has never failed me. It's super sharp, buttery smooth. The problem for me though is it sits in my bag a lot of the time. My personal style, I use the 50mm most of the day, and so I don't get my 85mm out that much. So to leave an almost $3,000 lens in my bag has just been kind of eating on me. The other thing with it is pretty big and heavy, so when I'm hand holding at a wedding all day long, this has just gotten kind of tough on my wrist for me. So I found this Samyang option, and I want to see optically, is it close enough that it would do the job for me? The first characteristic I want to compare is the background blur. So let's go ahead and look at that bokeh. To keep the shots as close as possible, I've got my camera here on a tripod. The Canon 85 is heavier, so I am noticing it's tilting my tripod down a little bit and changing the composition just a little bit. So hopefully the compositions are close enough. I want to look at the apertures that I use the most on a wedding day. I usually shoot at 1.2, 1.4, and f2. All right, I have the images imported here. The ones in blue are taken with the Samyang Rokinon 85. The ones in red are taken with the Canon RF 85mm 1.2. This is a big decision for me, so I am gonna kind of compare as much as I can so I can see for myself which lens I'm kind of gravitating towards. I know for a lot of you, you might make decisions based on what I find here, so I want to just be as honest as I can as I kind of look through the images. I'm going to start by comparing two photos that were both taken on a tripod, both shot at f1.4. So we're going to go ahead and look at these two full body portraits. I have been noticing that the Canon 85 is slightly more zoomed in than the Samyang Rokinon. So if I look in here, this pole I can see that much of, but in the Canon I can't quite see the whole thing. If we look up here at the top, we can see 2 rows of windows on the Canon. We can see 1, 2 in the edge of the third here already on the other lens. It should be noted that the more zoomed in you are at the same similar aperture, the blurrier the background will be. So, and that could be part of why, if I look at this Canon here, both of these are shot at 1.4, but the Canon definitely does have a blurrier background. The subject pops out just a little bit more. If we want to zoom in here, we can see the difference in the size of the bokeh. The highlights are a little bit bigger, a little more round. And yet if we look at this photo as a whole, I think it's fantastic. I think the background is blurred out very nicely, makes the subject pop right out of the photo. Next, I wanted to compare the lenses at their maximum apertures. So here is the Samyang at 1.4, here is the Canon at 1.2. Let's look at them side by side to see if you can tell a difference. If you can't tell much of a difference, it might not be worth the extra $2,000 for the Canon lens. If we zoom in here at the background blur up here, you can kind of tell the Canon does have a larger, blurrier background. Here we have two photos taken at their maximum apertures. Once again, this is the Samyang 85 taken at 1.4. This is the Canon taken at 1.2. Just wanted you to be able to look at them, compare them, see what you notice between the two. I think they both look very smooth, very creamy. The background blur looks great in both of them. Canon is slightly bigger bokeh there, slightly more blurry if you look at similar elements. Will a client ever notice though? I truly don't think so. So that's something that's weighing in my decision here. Here now is a comparison of the background blur, both of them taken at f2. We have the Canon over here, the Samyang over here, and to me they look very, very similar. I don't think any clients are going to notice any difference in the background blur. I took this photo with the Samyang Rokinon 85-1.4 so that I could see the foreground bokeh, just to see if there was anything in there that was of concern for me, and I think this looks great. Now we're going to compare sharpness between the two photos. Now I know some of you are on smaller screens, so I'm actually going to zoom into 300% so you can actually see the difference on some of those small screens. So this is 3:1. We're looking at my face here, right in the center of the photo. It's pretty clear the Canon has a lot more detail here. Both of these are shot at 1.4, so the same aperture. I can see the individual hairs on this one. This one is a little bit more soft here. Same with detail in my cheeks and my skin there. Some people might appreciate their skin not showing every little detail and might like that softer look. I'm not sure. It gets a little bit more interesting here as we go more to the mid of the frame. So if we look at my belt, the Canon is still razor tack sharp there, no loss in detail, whereas the Samyang Rokinon has gotten soft now. And it gets really interesting if we zoom in here on my shoe. Now we're down towards the very bottom of the frame. As you look at the Canon, it is still crazy perfectly sharp. You can even see my phone there on the floor that I put so I knew where to stand. And the Samyang has gotten very soft. Sometimes I might want the edge of the frame sharp, and it doesn't look like wide open. I would have that option here with the Samyang, whereas I do have that option with the Canon. Now we're comparing the two lenses at their maximum aperture. So here's the Samyang at 1.4, the Canon at 1.2. If you look at the images as a whole zoomed out like this, all the way up to an 8x10, I don't think there's any difference here. It's not until you zoom way in, if we look at this at 300% here, then we can tell the difference. So if you're a pixel peeping kind of person, you will be able to tell a difference here. The Canon is clearly sharper, a lot more detail in this part of the frame. As we go down my jacket here, the Canon retains detail in the fabric there, whereas the Samyang does not. And if we come down here to the belt is very crisp and contrasty and sharp in the Canon. In the Samyang Rokinon, it has become soft and a little bit more mushy. That said, looking at the images as a whole, very similar feel there. Now we're going to compare sharpness at f2. This is where it gets interesting because I think the Samyang has virtually caught up here. So if I zoom into 100%, they're both looking very, very sharp. No concerns whatsoever there. If I follow my jacket down and look at the detail here, I don't see a significant difference there. And even if I come down here into the corner and look at one of these branches, this thing has detail on that little branch right there all the way into the corner, as does this one. So if you're shooting at f2, I think the Samyang is a great deal here. Here now are two photos straight out of camera. This is the Samyang over here, the Canon over here. Both of them are shot at the same exposure. So we've got ISO 100 at the 85, both shot at 1.4, both shot at 1/800th of a second. The Canon though is brighter, which is interesting. So it's letting in a little bit more light, and it has less vignetting on it, which is also interesting. I'm gonna hit develop on them. Let's go ahead and turn on the profile corrections here for the Samyang 85. And we will go ahead and turn on the profile corrections here for the Canon. And let's go back and compare them now side by side so we can see how they look once the lens correction has been turned on. I think the Samyang is still looking just slightly darker than the Canon. So it's interesting that the Canon might be letting in a little bit more light even at the same exposure value.
Next, I put both cameras on my straps and headed out on the dock so I could take some comparison photos of some boats.
Here we have two photos I took at the same settings. It's interesting how they both render. We have the Canon over here and the Rokinon over here. It's interesting, number one, the color is just a little different. The Samyang I've been noticing is rendering a little bit more yellow. The Canon's rendering a little bit more cool. As we get more towards the edge of the frame, I'm noticing the Samyang kind of loses a little bit of contrast, kind of almost becomes slightly lighter. If we zoom in here, you can kind of tell the difference between the two a little bit. That said, if you didn't have the two to compare, would it matter? So I'm going to quickly develop this Samyang and see if I can get it to have that same contrast and punch as the Canon. Alright, so I played with the sliders a little bit there, just took me a couple seconds, and I really like how this image looks now. I think it looks great, and if I hit to compare it to the Canon, and I wasn't trying to do a perfect direct compare and make it look exactly like that one, but now I think they both look fantastic side by side there.
All right, now we're gonna check out the autofocus on this lens. Is it accurate and is it fast?
All right, now we're gonna do an autofocus test. I'm gonna have my son run straight at me here. We'll see how many shots it gets in focus using mechanical shutter here with the Samyang 85. On your marks, get set, go.
All right, so I took 32 photos in that burst. All of these at the beginning are in focus. That's very impressive. It's not until these last 5 when we get right here that the camera lost focus. I'm not sure what happened there. Maybe it decided to focus on his hand instead of his face. And so I don't know if that's the lens or the camera, but very impressive that it nailed these first ones where his face was in the photos.
Now we are going to test out the eye autofocus in a fast mode here. Let's see if it's finding his face and his eye here. All right, come a little closer to me. Just walk towards me kind of fast there.
Now we're looking at the photos where I was testing the eye detection to see if it could track him. I was especially interested because he has glasses, if that would throw it at all. And these are all in focus except for these 2. So 2 out of this group missed, and I don't know if that's a lens issue or a camera issue, but either way, that reliability rate is good enough for me. Now that said, I did some portraits of him the other day, and I don't have video footage of what was happening here, but I was trying to use the face and eye detection of his face, and it was kind of glitching. It would focus on his eye for a little bit, and then it would focus on his tummy, and then his eye, and then his tummy, and it was kind of erratic. And I don't know if that's because I switched to the electronic shutter, or if there's something else that was going on. So I pulled up to see if there was an update I could do for the lens. I bought this lens in April of 2022, and I'm assuming it shipped with the latest firmware. When I went to Samyang's website, it looks like the lens adapter to connect it to your computer to run the firmwares was all sold out, or maybe it's discontinued now. So that's a little bit of a concern that I couldn't find that. Hopefully they'll release more of those in the future.
When I turn on the camera with this lens adapted, the manual focus icon pops up, and then shortly after that, the autofocus comes in.
Now we're going to look at the size and weight of this lens. I think this is a big win for me personally. This lens weighs less than half of the Canon. It comes in at 1.28 pounds compared to 2.63 on the Canon. That's 583 grams compared to 1,195 grams. It's even smaller and lighter than my Canon 50mm lens, which I think is a great size. At one point I owned the Canon 85mm 1.4, the EF version, but I had to adapt that lens, and so it ended up similar in weight to the newer Canon 85mm 1.2. So that's part of the reason I sold it, whereas this lens is a lot lighter than that. For me, as I'm hand holding this up, I don't have the battery grip on my camera, so hand holding it kind of tough on my wrist. I injured my wrist about a year ago and it's still kind of healing, and so that bigger 85, that extra pound and a half, doesn't sound like a lot, but when it's held in that position for a long time, it does, at the end of the day, make my wrist kind of hurt. Not only is it smaller in weight, it's also smaller in dimensions, so it's a little shorter, it's a little less thick, easier to kind of hold in your hand. All right, so let's wrap it up. What am I gonna do? Truthfully, I'm not sure. I really like my Canon 85-1.2. It's sharp, it's contrasty, it's reliable, it never fails me, and that background pops like nothing else. And yet this little Samyang has wonderful background blur. It's sharp enough, especially when you're at f2, and yet it's really light, easy to use. And also there's a couple other good options. I mean, the Canon 85-1.4 is a great option. There's also the Canon 85mm f2. So if you're shooting at f2, that's another option. For me, I would probably take this Samyang maybe over it, and because this one's pretty sharp at f2, but it also gives you the option to shoot down to 1.4 if you need it. And yet the Canon has the option of the macro, so that's also kind of a factor on that one. In the back of my mind though, Sigma has some great lenses, and they've got them on the Sony mount, and I'm just waiting for them to release that on the Canon mount because they have an 85-1.4 that's of similar size, and yet it looks sharper than perhaps this one would be, and the price point would kind of be in the middle, maybe at about $1,200. So I'm just waiting for Sigma to come out with some of those RF lenses because I think they have great lenses and they're priced really well. I hope this video was helpful for you. I'm still thinking it through myself. I'm not sure yet what I'm going to do. Down in the description, I'll have links to all the products I mentioned in this video. Using those links really does help support me in making these videos.
Thank you so much for watching. If this video was helpful for you, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to our channel. We have a lot more fun stuff coming for you. We'll see you next time.